In 1995, a silent, grainy black and white film emerged, a film claiming to show a mysterious autopsy, performed not on a human being, however, but on an alien being. Subsequently broadcast to millions, it captivated the public's imagination, but in the years that followed, the truth behind the footage dissolved into smoke and mirrors. Let's re-examine the footage of the Roswell Alien Autopsy here on Things Visible and Invisible. Philip Mantle is a veteran British UFO researcher, author and broadcaster. He is also the founder of Flying Disc Press. He started investigating UFOs in the late 1970s and has written extensively on the subject, including Roswell Alien Autopsy. And he joins me down the line from his home in England. Philip, welcome back to Things Visible and Invisible.
Good evening, Sean. Nice to speak to you again.
This time, Philip, I'd like to talk to you about the Alien Autopsy film, purportedly about Roswell, which did the rounds in the 1990s. We're probably both old enough to remember when that film was released, and also the media circus that seemed to surround it, people making claims and counterclaims. You've written a number of books on this subject, so if possible, could you take us back, first of all, to just how this movie appeared and the reaction to it, both in the world of ufology, but also in the mainstream media?
Yeah, well, the film was actually released in 1995, but the story begins about 18 months earlier in 1993. Now, at that time, I was the press officer, amongst other things, for the British UFO Research Association. And one of the letters I received was from a company in London called the Merlin Group. And they simply said, they were looking to make a UFO documentary, and could we help them at all? So I wrote back. This is the days before email and that kind of thing, the old-fashioned way, explaining to them what we could and couldn't do. And the gentleman who owned this company was called Ray Santillis. So we exchanged correspondence. We had a couple of fax exchanges. And I spoke to Ray. And initially it sounded like a very general UFO documentary. And he was looking for still photographs, film clips that they could license, that kind of thing. So I gave him, the information he was looking for. And then out of the blue, the story changed. He said, well, actually, Philip, I have film of the Roswell UFO crash. And the creatures, he didn't call them aliens, the creatures being dissected, autopsied. So obviously, like anyone else, I said, well, show me.
Can I just
will.
Can I just ask, Philip, at that point, because that is such an astounding claim.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in that world, and you're well aware of hoaxers and people who are putting stuff to you. What was your gut feeling when that was said to you?
Well, I challenged it like I would challenge any piece of film or photograph. And as you are aware, Sean, people make claims all the time, and the vast majority of them can never substantiate the claims. Well, it was the same back in 1993. You claim to have this film, then show me. It's a simple thing, So that year, 1993, saw the release of the movie Fire in the Sky, all about Travis Walton. And I was set on by the PR company to help promote it. One of the things we did, we had Travis Walton and Mike Rogers do a presentation in London, followed by a press conference. Now, the location of this speaking engagement wasn't far from where Ray Santillis' offices were. So I invited him along. And that was the first time I met him face to face. And now the story had expanded even more. He said, he was in the States in 1992 looking for, film footage of the early rock and roll stars. And he'd met an old boy who at one point had been a military cameraman. And he claimed he'd shot the film of the Roswell aliens. So we now had a backstory, so to speak, not just I've got this film. So again, I simply said, show me it. That's all I'm asking. So it went backwards and forwards. I would phone him. Yes, I can show you. No, I can't. So in the end, I politely told him to go away. I said, I don't believe you, So he said, okay. So we jump forward in time now to early 1995. And again, because I was the press officer, I received a VHS video of the movie Roswell. It was made by Paul David, starred Cal McLaughlin and Martin Sheen. It was being released in the UK by Sony on video. Wasn't a big release, Sean. It was a minor thing, but we were sent a copy for review. And it reminded me about this man called Santillis. And he'd given me his business card, so I pulled that out of the file. And I thought, well, I'll ring him, see what he now has to say. So I phoned Ray, and he says, yes, I do have the film, Philip, but you don't believe me. I said, well, I can't believe you until you show me. So this time, he said, well, I'll put you through to my secretary, make an appointment with her, and come on down and I'll show you. So I live 200 miles north of London. So we drove down into his office. He was a very nice guy. I've met him once before. There was a lot of activity in the office, and it was obviously a very busy place. And he popped the TV on because it had a VHS player with it, popped this video cassette into it, and hey presto, there was some film. And it's what we called the tent footage. Ray claimed that this piece of film, which was very poor quality, was taken on site, and the creatures were recovered and put in a field tent before being shipped to wherever. And you see two men in white coats over the other side. Somebody walks in front of the camera with their back to them. There's no audio. There's a creature on the slab covered by, a cloth. But you can see its head and its hands. And to be honest, Sean, I was quite impressed because I expected to see some poor quality film, and this is what it was. Much to my amazement, Ray Santillis actually gave me a copy of it on VHS to take home with me. So what I could confirm now, if nothing else, there was some film. Film did exist. And I notified a number of my colleagues in different countries, please, keep it under your hat for now, because Ray says he's got some more. He says, we're having other film restored, cleaned, whatever. So in the next couple of months, my wife and I again traveled to London, and we were shown on separate occasions 2 different alien autopsy films. Everybody's seen the one that was on the Fox TV documentary, or they've seen it online. You have the creature on the slab with a big wound in its leg, and it's been autopsied. We saw another one. It's the same creature, same location, a slightly different autopsy, but the creature is undamaged. There's no wounds, no burn marks, no nothing. And then we were shown the debris film. So it's supposedly in this field tent, there's some wreckage and so on. So I asked Ray what his intentions were to do with this film. He owned it, and he said, well, I'm gonna put it on a video, I'm gonna make a documentary about it, and I'm going to sell it. So at this point, Sean, there was no media involved whatsoever. No TV, no newspapers. And Ray did make that VHS because he asked me to write it. So I wrote the storyline for it based on what he'd told me, of course. And it was narrated by a very famous British actor called Brian Blessed. Brian's best known for his part probably in Flash Gordon. Gordon's alive is one of his famous lines. And he narrated it. So, out of the blue, I made a mistake. I spoke to a journalist colleague of mine called David Clark. He worked at a local newspaper in Sheffield. Now, in 1995, I was also Bufora's conference organizer, and I had a conference set for August of 1995. David rang me, and what I'd done just before this, I said to Ray Santillis, will you show this film at our conference? And he says, yes. Didn't expect him to say that. And we shook hands. There was no money, there were no contracts involved. So when David contacted me, he said, I'm doing a small piece, for the local newspaper. Give me a quote about your conference and I'll do a bigger piece later. So, I just talked. We got the first 2 Russian scientists coming to speak on the subject, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and there's this alien autopsy thing. So David wrote a small piece. A couple of days later, I got a phone call from a press agency. It was called White's. And all they were interested in, Sean, was this little bit, literally a few lines about this alien autopsy.
Yeah.
So all I could do was quote what Ray Santillis had told me. I'd seen the film. I could vouch that the film was indeed there. And I thought no more of it. And I think it was a Sunday morning. I had an office upstairs in my house. And I got up the Sunday morning and I had a big old phone and fax machine. And the fax had been going all night long. The faxes were literally piled up on the floor. White's press agency had put the story out. Now, they never mentioned Ray Santillis' business name, and Ray doesn't live in London, so they couldn't find Ray Santillis. But Philip Mantle, living in this little town, my phone number was quite easy to find, and of course the fax had the same number, and the news was out, and Ray was not happy. Because he hadn't planned for this. And my phone, Sean, never stopped ringing for days. And I had journalists, literally waving their checkbooks at me. And I said, no, even though I had a piece of the film, I still had the tent footage on VHS. It wasn't mine to sell. I just gave them Ray's phone number and left them to it. And that's how it all started, and yeah.
Well, let's just pause there for a moment, Ray, Philip, because I wasn't familiar with this wonderful backstory and how involved you were with this film. I remember when the media started picking up on it, and it created a lot of waves. There was a lot of interest in it, not just in the usual quarters, which you will know well, but mainstream media. I remember, serious newspapers in this country carrying articles about it. British television did a number of interesting pieces on it. So suddenly it became alive. You had a VHS, which for anybody who's watching who doesn't remember, it was a videotape in those days. You had a videotape of it. Ray, I assume, was a filmmaker. Did it not surprise you that he didn't have some sort of film, 8mm or something, a film, as opposed to a videotape?
Yeah, Ray claimed that this was all shot on 16mm film. Yeah. And that was indeed standard for that time. And even in the military, they used 16mm. So I said, yeah, great. Give us a little bit of it and we'll have it tested.
Yep.
And we'll check its date. And he made this promise to a number of people. But when I was stood in his office that day and he said he was going to put it on a his own documentary, my way of thinking, Sean, was that the only way we're going to find anything out about this film is to get it out there, in the public domain. Yeah. And Ray clearly had his own objectives. He made it quite clear that, he wanted to commercialize this film. That was never a doubt about that. Now, where part of my agreement with Ray was to have the film analysed. Now, he lived in a county outside of London, but in the sort of commuter belt. And he lived quite close to Kodak UK. So I contacted them, explained, what we were trying to do, and they were more than happy to analyze, a piece of the film free of charge, although they made it quite clear they would not comment on what the film showed or what it depicted. Only would they confirm its age.
Right.
And not only that, quite near to Kodak in the UK is the British Film Institute, the BFI. And they said, we'll get the BFI involved as well, because one of their things that they do is they restore and keep old film, in its various formats down the years.
That's right.
So I put all that to Santillis and left him to it, because I didn't have any film I could show them. And before we knew it, Ray had organised a private screening at the London Museum on May the 5th, 1995. So it was invitation only. And I was there, and there was masses of the media there, Seán, and the lights go down in the auditorium. Now, bearing in mind, I've seen 4 pieces of film at this point, the tent footage, 2 autopsies, and this wreckage. So I'm expecting to see all this flicker across the screen. And up just popped the one autopsy film with no narration, nothing, no words, no. I found out later that Ray was in the projection booth at the back and he was talking into the microscope and he forgot to switch it on. As simple as that, he hadn't switched it on. So, there was an uproar at the end. Everybody wanted the answers. Well, what's this? And Ray was out of the back door and gone. And I'm stood there, and it's the only time that I felt like this. I was surrounded by the media because they knew of my involvement. Everybody was asking him, and I couldn't answer their questions, of course. So that was the day that Ray did his deal with Fox, and the rest, as they say, is history. And, we were up and running.
Well, let's just, because this is absolutely fascinating, Philip, absolutely fascinating. But we probably, just because of time, we'll if you could succinctly tell people, because some people watching this won't remember this, how the film subsequently got a life of its own and what happened. Just succinctly, what happened next in the world?
Ray Santillis did his deals with the various television companies, but it was shown first at our conference in August 1995, and the place was packed. When we showed it, you could hear a pin drop, and then literally the day after, it went out on Fox in the United States, and it was a huge success. And of course, the media were all over it because Ray had released some stills from it as well. So they could not just print words, there was pictures of it. And so I'm thinking, great, it's gone out around the world. Fox had to do some specials in the following weeks because it was that popular. And I thought, right, I'll sit back now and the information will come in. But it was like the old tumbleweed effect, Seán. I mean, nothing. Nobody came forward and said, oh, my grandfather told me about this. I think that might be him. Or, no, I'm one of the actors in it, and that's me. And we filmed it in X studio. Nothing. So I had to make a decision. What do I do? So I stuck with Ray Santillis in private and in public with him. But I did sit down to lunch with him one day in London and say, Ray, I'm going to get to the bottom of this film, no matter what. And he just said, that's fine, Philip. He just shrugged his shoulders and fine. And it was a long time afterwards before I got to the bottom of it, but that was the beginning. And of course, people must remember this is the height of the X-Files TV show as well. So the media were looking for this type of story, and this was perfect for them. And it had some balanced reviews. Others just said it was a hoax. But we didn't have any film to analyse, Seán, so we could only go with what was shown on the screen. And, there is nothing that stands out that's a fake.
Well, before we get into your investigation, Philip, I mean, you will have watched that film because you're one of the few people in this country, in fact, in the world, that had a copy. You would have watched it probably many times, analysing it. And for those, it was the original videos where you could stop and start and freeze frame and all the rest of it. Did you, I mean, you said it, you felt it was for real, but I mean, was there anything about it that looked too good to be true?
Yeah, I mean, Ray was very fortunate, Sean, because a couple of things unrelated to ufology happened. The first thing was, there was the accusations that if this was real military film, it wouldn't have been able to smuggle it out of the US. The authorities would have clamped down on it and so on. Now, we have I don't know if you use the same phrase in the States, but we have a thing here called a car boot sale. It's a bit like your garage sales. But just at the same time, there was a gentleman on this car boot sale. It's all second-hand material, old junk. And he bought some old videotapes. And he stuck one in his VHS player at home. And lo and behold, these were secret videotapes of the training of the Special Air Services, the SAS. Top secret, but they've turned up on an old car boot sale. Mm-hmm. And then somebody said, well, the quality of this film is too good. Because it is. It's very, very good quality, the autopsy parts. Lo and behold, a gentleman discovers a piece of film sat in his attic somewhere. And it was taken just before the Second World War. And it's Winston Churchill visiting the United States. And he's atop the Empire State Building. And this is the piece of historical film. The point being, Sean, it was in perfect condition. Mm. It looked like it had just been filmed yesterday, not, all those decades before. So those two things kind of, they made the news as well here in the UK. They played into Ray's hands as well. But so all I could say was, film exists. It's out in the open. It's going to get more coverage now because it's been shown in different parts of the world. And then the internet started. So this was the first UFO battle on the internet. There's no Google or anything like that. It's the old green screen. but that's how it went. And so I just stuck with it.
Just on that, what were the battle lines, Philip? Were there those that said it was a complete fabrication, and there were those true believers? Is that the kind of debate?
Yeah, there was those that were adamant it was a hoax.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't have a problem with that, but that's an easy opt-out, Sean, to call it a hoax. We have to prove it.
Yeah.
Similarly, with those that said it's authentic, well, then that has to be proven as well. And there was quite an in-between as well, because some people thought, has Ray Santillis bought this film in all honesty, but he's been tricked himself? He's been hoaxed. And he spent a lot of money on it, which he claimed to have done. So he had no option but to run with it and get his money back and maybe even make a profit, So there was sort of three camps. And then Ray also then released some film canister labels. So you have the film, that goes in a metal canister goes in a cardboard box, and you seal it with a label over the top. You write on the label what it is. So we released 3 of those, and they had a stamp on it, an official stamp. And somebody said, oh, that's the wrong stamp for that time. But it turns out, Sean, it was too blurred. You couldn't make out what it was. Mm-hmm. And then he released a statement from the alleged cameraman. So he had the cameraman's story. So there was more to get your teeth into, so to speak. And it was, but at this point, Sean, it was off and running. It snowballed, and there was no holding back. Ray had lost complete control over it. Absolutely. And away it went.
So You're involved in the world of ufology for many decades. You're in the middle of this media storm. The media storm continues. You take a slightly different tack, though, Philip. You start to, as you said to Ray, you were going to get to the bottom of this. So how did you go about that?
Well, I just stuck at it. I kept on friendly terms with Ray. And I would cover it wherever I could. If we got anything new, I would write about it, publish it. And it was a few years later, and I got an email out of the blue from a gentleman, and he said, I know who made the Alien Autopsy film. Okay, give us your phone number. And he did. So I spoke to him, and he said, I'm an animator. That's what I do for a living. He said, I went for a job interview at this company, and I'm sat there waiting for him. This chap was called Keith. And he said, the boss of this place was also called Keith, and he was on the telephone, and they're laughing and joking. And he heard a name, and the name he heard was Ray Santillis. Now, Keith had seen, one of the documentaries with the Alien Autopsy film on it. So when the boss of this company came off the phone, Keith said to him, is that the guy, the Alien Autopsy guy? And he said, yeah, but he said, he didn't make it, we did. We faked it. Now this chap the boss was called Keith Bateman. Mm-hmm. And what Keith told him was not about the autopsy film as such, but Keith claimed that he made the tent footage, which of course was the first piece of film given to anybody.
Now, was this film production company in England or was it in the States?
Yeah, they were in the UK.
Right.
So I found them. They'd since closed, but we have what's called Companies House here. So if you set up a company, you register it, and you give them your own personal details, where you live, all that. Yeah. And of course, I managed to find a phone number for this Keith Bateman. And when I phoned him to begin with, he wouldn't talk to me. It was a bit taken aback, Sean, to be honest.
I'm not surprised.
But eventually he did, and he said, Philip, he said, I didn't work for, I worked with Ray Santillis. We were to come up with silly ideas and work on various things together. He says he was at my place one day, and Ray brought up the idea of Roswell, and he just said, wouldn't it be great if we had some Roswell film? And Keith Bateman had a terrific, wicked sense of humour, didn't say anything. Just so happened one of his employees was reading a UFO book that had a bit of info about Roswell. So Keith says, we went away to a farm. He said, I have a friend who owns a farm. He said, I made the alien head out of a piece of polystyrene that you used to put your wigs on. And I just made the eyes a bit bigger and blacked them out, covered the rest of it up. And he said, the guy who walks in front of the camera is actually the farmer. And the two guys on the opposite side with white coats on were his employees. And that was the tent footage. And I managed to sort of confirm that by speaking to one of his employees and somebody else who had worked with him. So I challenged Ray Santillis on this. It was our first real proof that something wasn't right here. He made up an excuse. He said, no, I took real film to Keith to be transferred onto VHS. I took 16 millimeter, and he gave me this tent footage, and he said, here, I've done it for you. Now, we didn't know what was on the film, but the point being is that Keith Bateman only worked in VHS. He didn't have any equipment to transfer 16 millimeter film to VHS. They only worked in VHS, and that was it. So that was the first crack in the dam, so to speak.
Can I just ask, Philip? I mean, because this is pretty seismic, right? There's still the media storm going on. People are still debating whether this is a true depiction of what happened or a hoax. And you have now this piece of information. How did it leave you feeling?
Great, because that's what investigation is about,
That's
Sean.
true.
You investigate something and you go with the evidence that crops up, the information that crops up.
But what about the fact that your name was all over this film as well, that you had been the press contact for a lot of people, that you were associated with this film? Did you have any concerns that if what you were finding out was true, that it would sort of tarnish what the other work that you'd been doing in this field?
Not at all, no, not at all. I mean, when the film first came out, it was so popular, Sean, that I just give you an idea. There was a colleague of mine in the UK had just published a book, a UFO book. And because of what happened with the Alien Autopsy film, they had to reprint it. It had sold so many. It had nothing to do with Roswell.
No.
But what it did, it rose the interest in the subject in general, and Roswell specifically as well. So that book was reprinted, and they made some nice royalties on it, and fair enough. So when we found out about Keith Bateman and his claims about making the tent footage, I had a colleague of mine who was in the national newspapers. I passed the details on to them. They get in touch with Keith and they run the story, And Ray was fuming. He was as mad as hell. But he still maintained that the autopsy film was genuine and authentic and a way. But it was the first crack in the dam. So, like I said, Sean, at the beginning, it's easy to call something a hoax, but proving it is not always that easy.
Yeah.
And I'd been accused of all kinds of things. I was even called Ray's accomplice at one point because I was married with a small family at the time and we were having an extension built on our house. And somebody said, well, where does Philip Mantle get all that money from? He doesn't have that money. Well, I thought, well, how the hell do you know in the first place what money I've got? But they were right. I didn't have the money. My wife did. She'd owned her own property before we met. We sold that and we built the extension on our own house. But somebody assumed that, I was being bought off and paid by Ray Santillis, which was never the case. Ray never offered me any money or anything like that. He paid me a small fee for writing his documentary for him. That was it, and we were, so I'm off and running again. I used to do, Sean, when I used to shake the alien autopsy tree every now and again and see if anything fell out of it. And most of the time it didn't, but every now and again it did, of course.
So we've got this farmyard footage, I guess we call it now, or allegedly farmyard footage. So Ray is unhappy with this. The press are all over this now. What happens next?
Well, again, we jump forward in time. A few years again goes by. I got another anonymous email, this time from a gentleman called Simon.
Mm-hmm.
And Simon simply said, is there any interest in the alien autopsy film? I'm asking for a friend, so to speak. Now, I had just written an article for a magazine simply called UFO Magazine. It's edited by Graham Birdsall here in the UK, and it was a newsstand publication. And Graham had put the 8 pictures from it on the front page. This Simon had seen it. So again, I asked for a phone number. I got a phone number, and I said, what kind of interest are you talking about? He says, well, is any of the media interested? I said, well, the only person I know from a media point of view that might be interested is Bob Kiviat, TV producer in the States. He made Alien Autopsy fact or fiction for Fox, and we'd kept in touch down the years. So I said, why do you ask? He says, well, my friend actually made the dummies for Ray Santillis. So again, I challenged him just as the same I challenged Santillis originally. Okay, show me, tell me. So we arranged to meet. We actually met in a cafe in Manchester, which is only just over an hour from where I live. He chose the location, and we sat there and we talked. And I said, well, tell us who your friend is. He said, no, I can't give his name away. So I had a go at him, Sean, politely. And he did let one thing slip. And he mentioned that his friend was a sculptor whose work had overlapped from time to time in TV and movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned we have a TV station here called Channel 4. Way back in the 1980s, they had a famous TV show called Max Headroom.
That's right.
And at the start of it, Max was this head, this animation of this head, and it wobbled around and spoke and what have you. This guy had made that model. So it took a bit of digging, but we found who he was. And his name was John Humphreys. And he was indeed, a sculptor from the Royal Academy, and his work had overlapped into TV and radio. Film and television. So he was put in touch with Bob Kiviat, and he wanted to spill the beans. It's as simple as that. He wanted to tell the whole story and get paid for it. So Bob was negotiating with his representative, and then out of the blue, that all ceased. And Ray Santillis and his business partner Gary Shoefield had been offered a movie deal, which they accepted, and they got John Humphreys on board to do the special effects on the movie. And of course, one of the things he had to do to get the job was sign a non-disclosure agreement. So we got now. Just as John Humphreys is signing off and refused to speak anymore, he said, well, it's not me you need to speak to, really. It's Spiros. And that was it. So who is the hell is Spiros? We had no idea. So again, we jumped forward just a little bit. And I worked for a little company in Leeds at the time. And my boss said to us one day, she was a lovely lady. She says, I've got my boyfriend coming. He's coming for lunch. Would you like to join us? Said, yeah. So this gentleman comes. I said, what, Now she knew of my interest in all these things, and she knew of my involvement in the alien autopsy. And I said to this guy, what is it you do for a living? He said, well, I'm a trained barrister, but I don't practice it in court. I do contract law. Oh, great. He said, and I've got something in my briefcase that I'm sure is of interest to you. What is it? It was the contract for Ray Santillis and his business partner Gary Shoefield to make the movie. And it even told you how much money they were going to get paid. So I asked for a copy, but it wouldn't go that far. So it wasn't long after that I was in London and I met Ray Santillis and Gary Shoefield, and they were telling the usual nonsense, and then I told them what I'd found out. Seán, you could have knocked them over. You really could have knocked them up. They did not know what to say. And then, of course, I knew the film company that were making it. It was called QWERTY Films in London. So I contacted them. And like all film companies, they won't tell you anything about new projects.
Yep.
But we did know that the movie was going to star two British entertainers called Ant and Dec. They're still well known on TV even now. It's their first and last movie, but this was their first one. So I said, okay, perhaps you'd be able to tell me one thing. And this is on email to one of the executives at QWERTY Films. Would you be able to tell me who's doing the special effects for you? And she said, yeah, it's no problem. It's John Humphreys. He's making the dummies for us, and he made them for Ray Santillis as well. Ta-da! So I had that. I passed it to Bob. And, we were getting there, Seán. We were getting there. But it wasn't quite proof enough because John had clamped up, he'd signed his NDA, but we were heading in the right direction. Now, I had a colleague just a couple of miles from where I live. He ran his own little magazine at the time. And one day out of the blue, he gets a telephone call from a guy who says, I'm the man that made the Alien Autopsy film. Okay. What's your name? He says, my name is Spiros. Remember that? I just mentioned his name. Spiros Malaris. So my friend said, it's not me you need to speak to, it's Philip. So Russell had no idea about we'd been given the name Spiros or anything like that. He hadn't a clue what was going on. So I phoned this guy and he says, I am Spiros Malaris. I made the film. And as soon as I started talking to him, he's filling in all the blanks. All the missing parts of the puzzle are starting to be filled in. But again, Seán, I didn't just believe him. I arranged to bring him back and record an interview with him on the phone, which I did. And then some months later, I drove to his house in the south of England. And not only did he tell the story, but he had his diaries from that time. He had faxes from Kodak. He painted this beautiful set of pictures, which is, we'd probably call it a storyboard, but it was much, much better than that because he's a good artist himself. And he showed us all kinds of stuff. He could prove his story, in other words. So in 2006, we had a conference here, and Spiros was invited to speak. And it was the first time he'd spoken in public. He told the story. There were some members of the audience not happy with him, but he had a slightly different take on things. He said, I met Santillis by accident, and he told me about this crappy film he bought, which was the tent footage. And he said, I'm driving home that night, from Ray's office, and he said, I could make him some really good film, me and my pal John Humphreys. So it was Spiros's idea to put this to Ray, and they raised the money, and they made the film. They made 2 autopsy films. The one that nobody has seen apart from me and a couple of others, there are some mistakes on it that had that been broadcast, it would have sunk it immediately.
Yeah.
And he said, but the difference was we didn't make it for money. So I never made any money out of it. In fact, I lost. He said, the idea was we released, because Spiros in his background was a filmmaker, but he was also a magician. He was even a trained mechanic. He trained as a mechanic when he first left school. And he says the idea was we release it, and then 6 months later we give the big reveal. Ta-da! Aren't we great? We fooled the world. Mm-hmm. You should be hiring us. We're that good. But he said every time I went back to Ray Santillis, he said, I haven't made my money back on it now. And he said, I just got on with other things. And it was all these years later that when the movie came out, Spiros decided to have a look, and he was stunned what he found out about it, and he was stunned about how much money had been made out of it as well. It wasn't after the share of himself. He was after recognition, because he said, I made this, this. And, we finally solved it. Ray Santillis said, no, I just hired Spiros. He changed his story yet again. He said all the film, apart from a few bits of it, deteriorated. So we had to remake it all based on what I could remember and the few bits of film we had left. So he changed the story again. The movie went out. It's okay, Seán, but like I said, these are 2 very well-known TV personalities here in the UK. It's the one and only film they've ever made. Just, speaks volumes.
Now, unfortunately, Philip, the clock is against us, and this is an absolutely fascinating. I'm just thinking, actually, as you're talking, and you're a great storyteller, as I know, but this would actually make a fantastic film. Your involvement with this. But just bring us up to date, if you would, Philip, in terms of where it is today. I mean, in the world of ufology, is it seen simply as a hoax and interesting, maybe a sort of...
No, I think it's largely seen as a hoax, but there's a die-hard group who refuse to believe it.
Okay.
And they've invented a whole host of conspiracy theories as well,
Okay.
And of course, Ray, he encourages them. But just so everyone is aware, there is a new documentary series being made for Sky that will be broadcast sometime this year, and I've already been interviewed for it.
Very good. Is Ray still alive? Is he still involved in this debate?
Yeah, I mean, literally just a few weeks ago, I got an email from him out of the blue, just saying, "How you doing, Philip? Next time you come to London, we'll have lunch."
Right.
I thought, well, I'm, no problem. 'Cause I had no problem with that. And I've no intentions of going to London in the foreseeable future. But you never know. If I do, I might just take him up on his offer and see what he has to say.
And if Ray is watching this, if Ray wants to come on the show and give his side of this amazing story, then we'd be very happy to do so. But for now, Philip, you've written at least 2 books on this subject. So for now, tell people where they can pick up a copy of one of your many books on this subject and dig in a bit deeper.
Roswell Alien Autopsy is the most comprehensive, and it's had a subtitle, the film that shocked the world. That's on Amazon. You'll find it there easily. And you can tell it by the cover. The cover is all pieces of a jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
And all the various characters involved are jigsaw pieces.
And where can people find out about your other work, Philip?
Again, Flying Disc Press. It's easy enough to find. I'm very active on Facebook.
Yep.
So I'm not hidden away. I'm not like a hobbit. I'm easy to find.
Once again, thank you so much, Philip, for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
My pleasure, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.